goodness! There you are. I was just getting a fresh, empty cup for tea. How have you been? This brew includes saffron today, which is a bit of a tonic for your stomach. So I find that important. It's been a bit of a churn of a week. But how are you? Drop a hello in the comments, dear ones. You know I love to hear from you. Who have we got so far? Ooh. Hello, Bill. Hello, Reverend Tommy. Would you like a cup of tea? I don't know how to transport it to you, but I'm offering. That counts, right? All right, darlings. As usual, I have overdressed. Ooh. It's time to take away this and slip into this and these. I'm a bat. I am so excited to wear this. I'm feeling a bit nocturnal, so I'm a bat. I got these down at Bloom, which is one of my favorite festivals, and I host it, which is another reason I like it a lot, down in Charlotte, North Carolina, with Satara. It's a aerials and dance and fire festival, but not like the fire festival. My operator thought that was funny as well, and now I'm laughing. Oh goodness, all right. The annual getting in of the bed. It always depends on angle and the underwear I've chosen for the day. And I'm gonna back in. Easy. All right, let me get settled so I can look at you better. And oh, why are you so far away? Come closer. Ooh, that's much better. Thank you, darlings. Now, thank you very much, operator. It's a shout out to Madame Onsa for helping me. She creeps away. I would like to point out that I made sure there were no cords in your way this time.
Well done.
That your egress was safe. Hello, dear ones. Yes, you can make all the batty jokes you like. When I'm in repose, you can see them a bit better. Can you hear me all right, everyone? Be honest. All right. So this week, what happened? Well, I continue my search for work and housing in the north. You know when you're a kid, you think north is up. It's not. Just like heaven is up. It's not. I continue to look for housing and work, especially in the Baltimore or Philly scene and region. I am looking forward to moving my GlamourHobo life back into the stream that it was in about 2 years ago. And yes, if you have any ideas, suggestions, or questions that might help me rocket towards those places, I would be very grateful to hear them. You can always email me, or of course, Nat21. I would like to remind you that this is the Nat21 Adventures Twitch channel. I'm sure you know that. But thanks to them for hosting me every week. We have several shows. We have games, we have tarot education, we have writing sonnets, we have quirky haiku wrap-ups. It's all a lot of fun. We have programming Sunday through Thursday. Yes, Thursday. And I'm in 2 of those days. That's tonight when you've crawled into bed with me. And also tomorrow when I am the Metatron for the Tuesday night main eventer. Last week I covered myself with eyeballs because I've heard that humans enjoy eye contact. Oh, I thought it was fun. I'm still getting the black marks out of my pores, actually, but it was worth it. It was 100% worth it. All right, darlings. it's time to get this reading on the way. Again, how was your week? Good. This is our 9th story time. Good Lord, more than 2 weeks together? Ooh, I like that. I like that. So, I like that a lot. And I'm changing things up a little bit tonight. We will read Hitchhikers, I promise. But we're going to start with a little Italo Calvino, which I have read a couple of times here on the internet, but this is more poetic, in my opinion, and Italo Calvino is described as a fabulist. Who doesn't want to be a fabulist? I want to be a fabulist. And they're brilliant. They're adorable, and they're brilliant, and really sincere. And I believe originally written in Spanish. Italo Calvino was born in Cuba, 1923. So this is a book called Cosmicomics. Have you heard of it? Drop it in the chats. Bill sent me mail? I did not get mail from you. Operator! Did Bill send me any mail? Oh, poo. When did you send it? Hi, Sally. Oh, that's upsetting. Sally asked what my headwear is tonight. I'm a bat. Duh. Last week, Thursday? Ooh. I don't know. When I get it, if I get it by tomorrow's Nat 21 show, I will show it off. But if I don't get it until later, I will do it on Monday. You sent it not to Texas. I hope you didn't send it to Texas. Did you send it to Texas? All right, which one are we going to read? We are going to read... I honestly haven't read all of these. This could be just a... This could be a bit of a Russian roulette. I really want to read The Distance of the Moon, but it's a little... You know what? We're just going to do it. It's a little long, but it's adorable. All right, here we are. Can confirm operations have just looked to see if the mail arrived, and it hadn't. All right. Italo Calvino. Hey, Johnny O Twitch. The Distance of the Moon. Hydrate, everyone, hydrate. And remember, if you're nourishing the service, you can tip me. Information is at the bottom. But if you want to climb into bed with me for more than one occasion, you can become a Patreon supporter. That's right. You get all sorts of things like backstage access to things that I'm in the middle of, projects that you haven't heard of, in progress things, early access to my podcast, and a monthly get-together that is secret called the Midnight Tea Room, much like the restaurant at the end of the universe. Staying on brand. And I believe Johnny O Twitch is one of my patrons, so ask them what they're into. I send you mail. It's very charming. All right, The Distance to the Moon, Italo Calvino, April 19th, GlamourHobo Bedtimes. Here we go. Gonna pull you all a little closer so I can. Oh, all right. At one time, according to Sir George H. Darwin, the moon was very close to the earth. Then the tides gradually pushed her far away, the tides that the moon herself causes in the earth's waters, where the earth slowly loses energy. How well I know, old Quiffick cried. The rest of you can't remember, but I can. We had her on top of us all the time, that enormous moon. When she was full, nights as bright as day, but with a butter-colored light. It looked as if she were going to crush us. When she was new, she rolled around the sky like a black umbrella blown by the wind, and when she was waxing, she came forward with her horns so low she seemed about to stick into the peak of a promontory and get caught there. But the whole business of the moon's phases worked in a different way then, because the distances from the sun were different, and the orbits and the angle of something or other, I forget what. As for eclipses, with Earth and moon stuck together the way they were, why, we had eclipses every minute. Naturally, those two big monsters managed to put each other in the shade constantly, first one, then the other. Orbit? Oh, elliptical, of course. For a while it would huddle against us, and then it would take flight for a while. The tides, when the moon swung closer, rose so high nobody could hold them back. There were nights when the moon was full and very, very low, and the tide was so high that the moon missed a ducking in the sea by a hair's breadth. Well, let's say a few yards away. Climb up on the moon? Of course we did. All you had to do was row out to it in a boat, and when you were underneath, prop a ladder against her and scramble up. The spot where the moon was lowest as she went by was off the zinc cliffs. We used to go out with those little rowboats they had in those days, round and flat, made of cork. They held quite a few of us. Me, Captain Viftiv, his wife, my deaf cousin, and sometimes little Xuk. She was 12 or so at the time. On those nights the water was very calm, so silvery it looked like mercury. And the fish in it, violet-colored, unable to resist the moon's attraction, rose to the surface, all of them, and so did the octopuses and the saffron medusas. Pause here for a minute to say, I am drinking tea with saffron in it. Ha-ha! Perfect! There was always a flight of tiny creatures, little crabs, squid, and even some weeds, light and filmy, and coral plants, that broke from the sea and ended up on the moon, hanging down from that lime-white ceiling, or else they stayed in mid-air, a phosphorescent swarm we had to drive off like waving banana leaves at them. This is how we did the job. In the boat, we had a ladder. One of us held it, another climbed to the top, and a third, at the oars, rowed until we were right under the moon. That's why there had to be so many of us. I only mentioned the main ones. The man at the top of the ladder, as the boat approached the moon, would become scared and start shouting, "Stop! Stop! I'm going to bang my head!" That was the impression you had, seeing her on top of you, immense, and all rough with sharp spikes and jagged sawtooth edges. It may be different now, but then, the moon, or rather the bottom, the underbelly of the moon, the part that passed closest to Earth and almost scraped it, was covered with a crust of sharp scales. It had come to resemble the belly of a fish, and the smell, too, as I recall, if not downright fishy, was faintly similar, like smoked salmon. In reality, from the top of the ladder, standing erect on the last rung, you could just touch the moon if you held out your arms. We had taken the measurements carefully. We didn't yet suspect that she was moving away from us. The only thing you had to be very careful about was where you put your hands. I always chose a scale that seemed fast, climbed up in groups of 5 or 6 at a time. Then I would cling first with one hand and then with both, and immediately I would feel ladder and boat drifting away below me, and the motion of the moon would tear me from Earth's attraction. Yes, the moon was so strong that she pulled you up. You realized the moment you passed from one to the other. You had to swing up abruptly with a kind of somersault, grabbing the scales, throwing your legs over your head until your feet were on the moon's surface. Seen from the Earth, you looked as if you were hanging there with your head down, but for you, it was a normal position. And the only odd thing was that when you raised your eyes, you saw the sea above you, glistening with the boat and the others upside down, hanging like a bunch of grapes from a vine. Hello, newcomers. My cousin, the deaf one, showed a special talent for making those leaps. His clumsy hands, as soon as they touched the lunar surface, he was always the first to jump up from the ladder, suddenly became deft and sensitive. They found immediately the spot where he could hoist himself up. In fact, just the pressure of his palms seemed enough to make him stick to the satellite's crust. Even I thought I saw the moon come toward him as he held out his hands. He was just as dexterous in coming back down to Earth, an operation still more difficult. For us, it consisted of jumping as high as we could, our arms upraised. Seen from the moon, that is, because seen from the Earth it looked more like a dive or like a swimming downwards, arms at our sides. Like jumping up from the Earth, in other words, only now we were without the ladder because there was nothing to prop it against on the moon. But instead of jumping with his arms out, my cousin bent toward the moon's surface, his head down as if for a somersault, then made a leap, pushing with his hands. From the boat, we watched him, erect in the air as if he were supporting the moon's enormous ball and were tossing it, striking it with his palms. Then, when his legs came within reach, we managed to grab his ankles and pull him down on board. Now, you will ask me what in the world we went up to the moon for. I'll explain it to you. We went to collect the milk, with a big spoon and a bucket. Moon milk was very thick, like a kind of cream cheese. It formed in the crevices between one scale and the next. Through the fermentation of various bodies and substances of terrestrial origin, which had flown up from the prairies and forest and lakes, as the moon sailed over them. It was composed chiefly of vegetal juices, tadpoles, bitumen, lentils, honey, starch crystals, sturgeon eggs, molds, pollens, gelatinous matter, worms, resins, pepper, mineral salts, combustion residue. You had only to dip the spoon under the scales that covered the moon's scabby terrain, and you brought it out filled with that precious muck. Not in the pure state, obviously. There was a lot of refuge. In the fermentation, which took place as the moon passed over the expanses of hot air above the deserts, not all the bodies melted. Some remained stuck to it, fingernails and cartilage, bolts, seahorses, nuts and pentacles, shards of crockery, fish hooks, at times even a comb. So this paste, after it was collected, had to be refined, filtered. But that wasn't the difficulty. The hard part was transporting it down to the Earth. This is how we did it. We hurled each spoonful into the air with both hands, using the spoon as a catapult. The cheese flew, and if we had thrown it hard enough, it stuck to the ceiling. I mean, the surface of the sea. Once there, it floated, and it was easy enough to pull it into the boat. In this operation, too, my deaf cousin displayed a special gift. He had strength and a good aim. With a single sharp throw, he could send the cheese straight into a bucket we held up for him from the boat. As for me, I occasionally misfired. The contents of the spoon would fail to overcome the moon's attraction, and they would fall back into my eye. I still haven't told you everything about the things my cousin was good at. The job of extracting lunar milk from the moon's scales was child's play to him. Instead of the spoon, at times he had only to thrust his bare hand under the scales, or even one finger. He didn't proceed in any orderly way. He went to isolated places, jumping from one to the other, as if he were playing tricks on the moon, surprising her, or tickling her. And wherever he put his hand, the milk spurted out, as if from a nanny goat's teats. So the rest of us had only to follow him and collect with our spoons the substance that he was pressing out, first here, then here, but always as if by chance, since the deaf one's movements seemed to have no clear, practical sense. There were places, for example, that he touched merely for the fun of touching them. Gaps between two scales, naked and tender folds of lunar flesh. At times my cousin pressed not only his fingers, but, in a carefully gauged leap, his big toe. He climbed onto the moon barefoot. And this seemed to be the height of amusement for him, if we could judge by the chirping sounds that came from his throat as he went on leaping. The soil of the moon was not uniformly scaly, but revealed irregular, bare patches of pale, slippery clay. These soft areas inspired the deaf one to turn somersaults or to fly almost like a bird, as if he wanted to impress his whole body into the moon's pulp. As he ventured farther in this way, we lost sight of him at one point. On the moon, there were vast areas we had never had any reason or curiosity to explore, and that was where my cousin vanished. I had suspected that all those somersaults and nudges he indulged in before our eyes were only a preparation, a prelude to something secret meant to take place in the hidden zones. We fell into a special mood on those nights off the zinc cliffs. Sorry, lost my place. Gay, but with a touch of suspense, as if inside our skulls, instead of the brain, we felt a fish floating, attracted by the moon. And so we navigated, playing and singing. The captain's wife played the harp. She had very long arms, silvery as eels on those nights, and armpits as dark and mysterious as sea urchins. And the sound of the harp was sweet and piercing, so sweet and piercing it was almost unbearable, and we were forced to let out long cries, not so much to accompany the music as to protect our hearing from it. Transparent medusas rose to the sea's surface, throbbed there a moment, then flew off, swaying toward the moon. Little Zixth amused herself by catching them in mid-air, though it wasn't easy. Once, as she stretched her little arms out to catch one, she jumped up slightly and was also set free. Thin as she was an ounce or two short of the weight necessary for Earth's gravity to overcome the moon's attraction and bring her back. So she flew up among the medusas, suspended over the sea. She took fright, cried, then laughed, and started playing, catching shellfish and minnows as they flew, sticking some into her mouth and chewing them. We rowed hard to keep up with the child. the moon ran off in her eclipse, dragging that swarm of marine fauna through the sky, and a train of long entwined seaweeds, and hanging there in the midst. Her two wispy braids seemed to be flying on their own, outstretched towards the moon. But all the while she kept wriggling and kicking at the air as if she wanted to fight that influence, and her socks, she had lost her shoes in the flight, slipped off her feet and swayed, attracted by the earth's force. On the ladder, we tried to grab them. The idea of eating the little animals in the air had been a good one. The more weight gained, the more she sank toward the earth. In fact, since among those hovering bodies hers was the largest, mollusks and seaweeds and plankton began to gravitate about her. As soon as the child was covered with silliest little shells, chitinous carapaces, and fibers of sea plants, and the farther she vanished into that tangle, the more she was freed of the moon's influence, until she grazed the surface of the water and sank into the sea. We rowed quickly to pull her out and save her. Her body had remained magnetized, and she had to work hard to scrape off all the things encrusting her. Tender corals were wound about her head, and every time we ran the comb through her hair, there was a shower of crayfish and sardines. Her eyes were sealed shut by limpets, clinging to the lids with their suckers. Squid's tentacles were coiled around her arms and her neck, and her little dress now seemed woven only of weeds and sponges. We got the worst of it off her, but for weeks afterward she went on pulling out fins and shells, and her skin, dotted with little diatoms, remained affected forever, looking, to someone who didn't observe her carefully, as if it were faintly dusted with freckles. This should give you an idea of how the influences of Earth and Moon, practically equal, fought over the space between them. I'll tell you something else. A body that descended to the Earth from the satellite was still charged for a while with lunar force, and rejected the attractions of our world. Even I, big and heavy as I am, every time I had been up there, I took a while to get used to the Earth's up and its down. The others would have to grab my arms and hold me, clinging in a bunch in the swaying boat, while I still had my head hanging and my legs stretching up towards the sky. Hold on to us," they shouted at me, and in all that groping, sometimes I ended up by seizing one of Mrs. Vitvid's breasts, which were round and firm, and the contact was good and secure, and had an attraction as strong as the moon's, or even stronger, especially if I managed, as I plunged down, to put my other arm around her hips, and with this I passed back into our world, and fell with a thud into the bottom of the boat, where Captain Vitvid brought me around, throwing a bucket of water in my face. He deserves some sort of a drink in his face, that's for sure. Isn't this just full of crazy imagery, just beautiful and a little terrifying and fabulous, as he is a fabulist. This is how the story of my love for the captain's wife began, and my suffering. Because it didn't take me long to realize whom the lady kept looking at incessantly. When my cousin's hands clasped the satellite, I watched Mrs. Vitvid, and in her eyes I could read the thoughts that the deaf man's familiarity with the moon were arousing in her. And when he disappeared in his mysterious lunar explorations, I saw her become restless, as if on pins and needles, and then, as if all were clear to me, how Mrs. Vitvid had become jealous of the moon, and I was jealous of my cousin. Her eyes were made of diamonds, Mrs. Vitvid's. They flared when she looked at the moon, almost challengingly, as if she were saying, "You shan't have him." And I felt like an outsider. The one who least understood all of this was my deaf cousin. When we helped him down, pulling him, as I explained to you, by his legs. Mrs. Vidfid lost all her self-control, doing everything she could to take his weight against her own body, folding her long, silvery arms around him. I felt a pang in my heart. The times I clung to her, her body soft and kind, but not thrust forward the way it was with my cousin, while he was indifferent, still lost in his lunar bliss. I looked at the captain, wondering if he also noticed his wife's behavior, but there was never a trace of any expression on that face of his, eaten by brine, marked with tarry wrinkles. Since the deaf one was always the last to break away from the moon, his return was the signal for the boats to move off. Then, with an unusually polite gesture, Vidfid picked up the harp from the bottom of the boat and handed it to his wife. She was obliged to take it and play a few notes. Nothing could separate her more from the deaf one than the sound of the harp. I took to singing in a low voice that sad song that goes, "Every shiny fish is floating, floating. Every dark fish is at the bottom of the sea." And all the others, except my cousin, echoed my words. Every month, once the satellite had moved on, the deaf one returned to his solitary detachment from the things of the world. Only the approach of the full moon aroused him again. That time I had arranged things so it wasn't my turn to go up. I could stay in the boat with the captain's wife. But then, as soon as my cousin had climbed the ladder, Mrs. Vidfid said, "This time, I want to go up there too." This had never happened before. The captain's wife had never gone up to the moon, but Vidfid made no objection. In fact, he almost pushed her up the ladder bodily, exclaiming, "Go ahead, then!" And we all started helping her. And I held her from behind and felt around her soft in my arms, and to hold her up I began to press my face and the palms of my hands against her, and when I felt her rising into the moon's sphere I was heartsick at its lost contact, so I started to rush up after her, saying, "I'm going to go up too for a little while, to help out." I was held back as if in a vice. "You stay here. You have work to do later." The captain commanded this without raising his voice. At that moment, each one's intentions were already clear. And yet I couldn't figure things out. Even now, I'm not sure I've interpreted it all correctly. Certainly, the captain's wife had for a long time been cherishing the desire to go off privately with my cousin up there, or at least to prevent him from going off alone with the moon. But probably she had a still more ambitious plan, one that would have to be carried out in agreement with the deaf one. She wanted the two of them to hide up there together and stay on the moon for a month. But perhaps my cousin, deaf as he was, hadn't understood anything of what she had tried to explain to him, or perhaps he hadn't even realized that he was the object of the lady's desires, and the captain? He wanted nothing better than to be rid of his wife. In fact, as soon as she was confined up there, we saw him give free rein to his inclinations and plunge into his vice, and then we understood why he had done nothing to hold her back. But had he known from the beginning that the moon's orbit was widening? None of us could have suspected it. The deaf one, perhaps, but only he. In the shadowy way he knew things, he may have had a presentiment that he would be forced to bid the moon farewell that night. This is why he hid in his secret places and reappeared only when it was time to come back down to the board. It was no use for the captain's wife to try to follow him. We saw her cross the scaly zone various times, length and breadth, then suddenly she stopped, looking at us in the boat, as if about to ask us whether we had seen him. Surely there was something strange about that night. The sea surfaced instead of being taut as it was during the full moon, or even arched a bit towards the sky, now seemed limp, sagging, as if the lunar magnet no longer exercised its full power. And the light, too, wasn't the same as the light of other full moons. The night's shadows seemed somehow to have thickened. Our friends up there must have realized what was happening. In fact, they looked at us with frightened eyes, and from their mouths and ours at the same moment came the cry, "The moon is going away!" The cry hadn't died out when my cousin appeared on the moon, running. He didn't seem frightened or even amazed. He placed his hands on the terrain, flinging himself into his usual somersault, but this time, after he had hurled himself into the air, he remained suspended, as little Zislis had. He hovered a moment between moon and earth upside down, then laboriously moving his arms like someone swimming against a current, he headed with unusual slowness towards our planet. From the moon, the other sailors hastened to follow his example. Nobody gave a thought to getting the moon milk that had been collected into the boats, nor did the captain scold them for this. They had already waited too long. The distance was difficult to cross by now. When they tried to imitate my cousin's leap or his swimming, they remained there, groping, suspended in midair. "Cling together, idiots! Cling together!" the captain yelled. At this command, the sailors tried to form a group, a mass, to push all together until they reached the zone of the Earth's attraction. All of a sudden, a cascade of bodies plunged into the sea with a loud splash. The boats were now rowing to pick them up. "Wait! The captain's wife is missing!" I shouted. The captain's wife had also tried to jump, but she was still floating only a few yards from the moon, slowly moving her long silvery arms in the air. I climbed up the ladder, and in a vain attempt to give her something to grasp, I held the harp out towards her. "I can't reach her! We have to go after her!" I started to jump up, brandishing the harp. Above me, the enormous lunar disk no longer seemed the same as before. It had become much smaller. It kept contracting as if my gaze were driving it away, and the emptied sky gaped like an abyss where, at the bottom, the stars had become multiplying, and the night poured a river of emptiness over me, drowned me in dizziness and alarm. "I'm afraid," I thought. "I'm afraid to jump. I'm a coward." And at that moment, I jumped. I swam furiously through the sky and held the harp out to her, and instead of coming toward me, she rolled over and over, showing me first her impassive face and then her backside. "Hold tight to me," I shouted, and I was already overtaking her, entwining my limbs with her, as if we cling together, we can go down. And I was concentrating all my strength on uniting myself more closely to her, and I concentrated my sensations as I enjoyed the fullness of that embrace. I was so absorbed I didn't realize at first that I was, indeed, tearing her from her weightless condition, but was making her fall back on the moon. Didn't I realize it? Or had that been my intention from the very beginning? Before I could think properly, a cry was already bursting from my throat. "I'll be the one to stay with you for a month. Or rather, on you," I shouted in my excitement. "On you for a month." And at that moment our embrace was broken by our fall to the moon's surface, where we rolled away from each other among the cold scales. I raised my eyes as I did every time I touched the moon's crust, sure that I would see above me the native sea, like an endless ceiling. And I saw it, yes, I saw it this time too, but much higher and much more narrow, bound by its borders of coasts and cliffs and promontories, and how small the boats seemed, and how unfamiliar my friends' faces, and how weak their cries. A sound reached me from nearby. Mrs. Vidfid had discovered her harp and was caressing it, sketching out a chord as sad as weeping. A long month began. The moon turned slowly around the earth On the suspended globe we no longer saw our familiar shore, but the passage of oceans as deep as abysses, and deserts of glowing lapilli, and continents of ice, and forests writhing with reptiles, and the rocky walls of mountain chains gashed by swift rivers, and swampy cities, and stone graveyards, and empires of clay and mud. The distance spread a uniform color over everything. The alien perspectives made every image alien. Herds of elephants and swarms of locusts ran over the plains, so evenly vast and dense and thickly grown that there was no difference amongst them. I should have been happy. As I had dreamed, I was alone with her, that intimacy with the moon I had so often envied my cousin, and with Mrs. Vitford, was now my exclusive prerogative. A month of days and lunar nights stretched uninterrupted before us. The crust of the satellite nourished us with its milk, whose tart flavor was familiar to us. We raised our eyes up to the world where we had been born, finally traversed in all its various expanse, explored landscapes no earth being had ever seen, or else we contemplated the stars beyond the moon, big as pieces of fruit, made of light, ripened on the curved branches of the sky, and everything exceeded my most luminous hopes. And yet, it was instead exile. I thought only of the earth. It was the earth that caused each of us to be that someone he, or rather than someone else, up there, wrested from the earth. It was as if I were no longer that I, nor she that she, for me. I was eager to return to the earth, and I trembled at the fear of having lost it. The fulfillment of my dream of love had lasted only that instant when we had been united, spinning between earth and moon, torn from the earthly soil, my love now only the heart-rending nostalgia for what it lacked, a where, a surrounding, a before, an after. This is what I was feeling, but she? As I asked myself, I was torn by my fears, because if she also thought only of the earth, this could be a good sign, a sign that she was finally come to understand me, but it could also mean that everything had been useless, that her longings were directed still only towards my deaf cousin. Instead, she felt nothing. She never raised her eyes to the old planet. She went off, pale, among those wastelands, mumbling dirges and stroking her harp as if completely identified with her temporary, as I thought, lunar state. A hopeless defeat. Did this mean I had won out over my rival? No, I had lost, a hopeless defeat, because she had finally realized that my cousin loved only the moon. And the only thing she wanted now was to become the moon, to be assimilated into the object of that extra-human love. When the moon had completed this circling of the planet, there were, again, over the zinc cliffs. I recognized them with dismay. Not even in my darkest previsions as I thought the distance would have made them so tiny. In the mud puddle of the sea, my friends had set forth again, without the now useless ladders, but from the boats rose a kind of forest of long poles. Everybody was brandishing one, with a harpoon or a grappling hook at the end, perhaps in the hope of scraping off the last bit of moon milk, or of lending some kind of help to us wretches up there. But it was soon clear that no pole was long enough to reach the moon, and they dropped back, ridiculously short, humbled, floating on the sea. And in that confusion some of the boats were thrown off balance and overturned, but just then from another vessel a longer pole, which till then they had dragged along on the water's surface, began to rise. It must have been made of bamboo, of many, many bamboo poles stuck one into the other, and to raise it they had to go slowly because, thin as it was, if they let it sway too much it might break. Therefore they had to use it with great strength and skill, so that wholly vertical weight wouldn't rock the boat. Suddenly it was clear that the tip of that pole would touch the moon, and we saw it graze, then press against the scaly terrain, rest there for a moment, give a kind of little push, or rather a strong push that made it bounce off again, then came back and strike that same spot as if it were on the rebound, then move away once more, and I recognized, we both, the captain's wife and I, recognized my cousin. It couldn't have been anyone else. He was playing that last game with the moon, one of his tricks, with the moon on the tip of his pole, as if he were juggling her. And we realized that his virtuosity had no purpose, aimed at no practical result. Indeed, you would have said he was driving the moon away, that he was helping her departure, that he wanted to show her to her more distant orbit. And this, too, was just like him. He was unable to conceive desires that went against the moon's nature, the moon's course and destiny, and if the moon now tended to go away from him, then he would take delight in this separation, just as, till now, he had delighted in the moon's nearness. What could Mrs. Vidfid do in the face of this? It was only at this moment that she proved her passion for the deaf man hadn't been a frivolous whim, but an irrevocable vow. If what my cousin now loved was the distant moon, then she too would remain distant on the moon. I sensed this, seeing that she didn't take a step towards the bamboo pole, but simply turned her harp towards the earth, high in the sky, and plucked the strings. I saw her, but to tell you, I say I saw her, but to tell you the truth, I only caught a glimpse of her out of the corner of my eye, because the minute the pole touched the lunar crust, I had sprung and grasped it, and now, fast as a snake, I was climbing up the bamboo knots, pushing myself along with jerks of my arms and knees, light in the rarefied space, driven by the natural power that ordered me to return to the earth, oblivious of the motive that had brought me there, or perhaps more aware of it than I had been in this unfortunate outcome. And already my climb up the swaying pole had reached the point where I no longer had to make any effort, and I could just allow myself to slide, head first, attracted by the earth, until my haste broke the pole into 1,000 pieces, and I fell into the sea amongst the boats. My return was sweet, my home refound, but my thoughts were filled only with grief at having lost her, and my eyes gazed at the moon forever beyond my reach as I sought her. And I saw her. She was there where I had left her, lying on a beach directly over our heads, and she said nothing. She was the color of the moon. She held the harp at her side and moved one hand now and then in slow arpeggios. I could distinguish the shape of her bosom, her arms, her thighs, just as I had remembered them now. Just as now, when the moon has become that flat, remote circle, I still look for her as soon as the first silver appears in the sky, and the more it waxes, the more clearly I imagine I can see her or something of her, but only her in the 100,000 different vistas, she who makes the moon, and whenever she is full, sets the dogs to howling all night long, and me with them. That, my darlings, was Italo Calvino's The Distance to the Moon in his collected short stories, Cosmicomics. It's such a sweet story. It's such a hopeless story, as well as a bit of a parable. clearly I don't actually know what a parable is, as well as a parable. What did you think? Send me your thoughts. Hello, Screaming Dragon. It's nice to see you. And that book is just filled with those stories. Just brilliant, thoughtful, fabulous tales, all based on space and the origins of planets and nebulas and physics and math, all written in that way, that narrative, beautiful style. At this moment, before we quickly transition to not the Hitchhiker's Guide, because that actually took much longer than I expected, but I will do a microfiction for you today based off of the Nat 21 Adventures of the Week. I should say that I have a podcast. It's called the GlamourHobo Field Notes. You can get it anywhere that streaming streams, and there are 2 seasons available for you. They are collections of microfictions that I write while I am traveling on the road, and each episode is about 6 or 7 minutes long, and I like to say it is a tiny podcast of enormous delight. So please subscribe wherever you get your streams. My mellifluous voice will find you wherever you are. And of course you can support that show, support the other work and performance that I do, and of course this, by tipping me tonight if you've been nourishing the service, or becoming a Patreon. And if you'd like to send me physical gifts, not the fake things that are money, you can send your nightwear, fancy headgear, science fiction and fantasy books, or your shitty/wonderful/fan fiction, and I will read it on this show. Drunk with power! It is my pleasure and privilege to be here with all of you, dressed in my bat regalia. I'm a bat! Thank you, operator, for your all caps lock shouting about me being a bat. It does just fill me with joy. And so, darlings, I invite you to listen for a moment for this 100 League story of the world of Urt, inspired by the week's adventures. And I have to say, there's a bit of an ego boost for me as your Metatron for the Tuesday night show, because the haiku wrap-up on Sunday, which is 5 days later, the first 5 haikus were about me. That was very flattering, and it filled me with joy. So thank you, Romulus, for including me in your haiku shenanigans. All right. 100 League, let's call this the 400 League story. Or no, let's call it the 900 League story, because it's our 9th bedtime tales together. 900 League story. Urt on the way to the lost temple of Thassa. The magic carpet was having none of it. He shuttled them from place to place. They had things to do on their own, you know. A carpet has a lot of responsibilities in this world. They were built majestically by the hands of artisans in the mountains far away, by golden fleeced llamas, and they were a high quality creature of their own selves. And why are they essentially just a fancy silent Uberhawk? The magic carpet had feelings, and no one was asking how it felt about anything. It was beginning to think that it should start a union. For all of the other flying inanimate objects, the world of Urt wasn't doing a very good job of taking care of its most valuable assets. The creatures that allowed its citizens to go from one place to another. It drove the economy. It drove people through the space that drove the economy. It was driven by its own rules and its own loves. Union. That was a good idea. It made its tassels shimmer. It made its knots kind of loosen and then tighten again very quickly. This magic carpet was having second thoughts about its bindings to these creatures, to this eldritch merfolk, to this nudist half-orc, to this gnome, and it didn't actually have the words for everyone else that it had been sat upon all of this time. And when you are a worker whose clients literally sit upon you and you bear their weight, it is enough to make you think of bucking them into the sea and starting a riot. And so that, my loves, is my International Workers' Day / May Day 900 League story, inspired by the world of Urt. I was going to talk about the Metatron, but I found that to be a little egotistical, and I do have a very deep, soft spot for the rug from Aladdin. The Disney's Aladdin. He had so much personality. I had a crush on the carpet. I'm honest about it. So this evening, my dear ones, I invite you at this time to drop a good night in the chat to your fellows and to me. And I will say again, it is my pleasure and my privilege to be here with you. And soon, maybe not in this egg, maybe a different place. I've got my eye on you, Philly, and my other eye on you, Baltimore. Good night, dear ones. Good night.